even after things got weird when I was pregnant, I still was like, but he's still such a nice guy. And I think that every single person who comes out of a DV relationship can say that about that. Because the thing is, if these guys are assholes from day one, they're not going to get very far. That's part of that love bombing cycle.
Welcome to Come Talk with Amy, the podcast where sex isn't whispered about, it's talked about out loud. I'm Amy, your host and intimacy coach, here to spark raw, playful, and unfiltered conversations about relationships, desire, and everything in between. No shame, no scripts, just real talk about what really turns us on. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Come Talk with Amy. We have a very important topic today, one that is dear and near to my heart. I do want to mention that we will be talking about some sensitive topics today. We're going to be talking about abuse. I'm just giving a trigger warning for people who may need that. This topic is so important to discuss and important to get the words out there and the information out there to our listeners. Having that said, as you listen, please check in with yourself, be mindful. If you need to take a break and then come back, or if you need to skip any parts, etc. But we're so glad that you are here with us, and let's dive in. Today we have with us my dear friend, Eunice Brownlee. Hi, Eunice.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Eunice was one of the first people to know about me diving into the world of sexual health and expanding into coaching and podcasts. So yay, Eunice was one of my first hype women.
I love being a hype woman, especially for projects such as this, which are so important. And before this project even was born, or before when it was still maybe pre-seedling, we had so many conversations about just how important it is to destigmatize all of the topics that you and I are going to cover today. So I'm very excited to have a conversation with you.
I'm so excited too, and absolutely, 1000%. So Eunice, before we jump into today's topic, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you've been up to, and what you're currently up to?
I wear many hats. As one of my friends says, I'm creatively promiscuous. I love the idea that people are always, Eunice, what are you up to now? Because it's really hard to keep track of what I'm working on, because I don't just have my business work that I do, which is I'm a speaker coach and a professional speaker and a writer. That's how I make money. And I also spend a lot of time doing advocacy work with the SAVES grant, which is the Safe Access for Victims Economic Security, which is a 13-site demonstration grant to help people who are experiencing domestic violence access child support safely. And Colorado is one of those 13 sites, so I sit on the advisory board for that. Most recently, I also joined another advisory board for the Violence Against Women Implementation Plan, so how we spend the money that we get from the federal government in the state of Colorado. So I do a lot of advocacy work around domestic violence and survivorship. That I do spend a lot of time with that. That's not my main work. So
Eunice, you are a powerhouse. You do so much amazing work. I would love if you could speak a little bit to what brought you to working as a domestic violence advocate.
This is always kind of a fun story because I have a daughter. She's 19 years old. I have been a single mom for the majority of her 19-year-old life. And I'm also a divorced woman. It's always fun when I talk about being divorced and being a single mom, and then people making the assumption and asking, does your ex-husband ever see your daughter? No, because he is not her father. Her father is the rebound guy from that relationship. He was somebody that my friend sent me up with on a blind date. I know when we had our first date, I still hadn't even filed for divorce yet. We were separated and definitely headed down that path. This friend was really encouraging me to get back on the horse, and I was just like, I'm not ready. And she's like, you can have a little fun while you're at it. So I ended up in for lack of a better term, a fuck buddy situation with this guy that I had met on a blind date. He seemed really nice despite the protections that we had. I still ended up pregnant. And the thing that they say about not taking birth control with antibiotics, totally true, because I was 23 weeks pregnant before I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And that created some interesting complications to all of it. Her father and I were never in a relationship per se, although we had a sexual relationship for quite some time. And that was actually one of the things that, in hindsight, I recognized was part of the abuse that I endured at his hands. But it also took him violently physically attacking her for me to start unpacking and recognizing that I had been in a coercively controlled domestic violence relationship with this man for many years. I'll never forget the very first thing that both my boss asked and the law enforcement asked the day that the school called the police because my daughter showed up to school with bruises around her neck was, well, has he ever been violent with you like this? And my answer was no. And that answer hung over me through our entire court process, both on the criminal side and on the family court side, because by me saying that I hadn't ever been abused by this man, it haunted me because they kept going back to say, in this interview, this is what you said. And the thing is he never hit me. But over the last 8 years of me unpacking all of this, he was very abusive. The type of abuse that we're talking about is coercive control, which is generally, it's a non-physical form of domestic violence and abuse. And every single violent act of abuse has an element of coercive control that precedes it. And so people need to know about this. This is the way that abusers gain control over their victims. And the more therapy I go through, the more I can see that this was a pattern of his for so many years. And one of the main things that coercive control abusers use is sex as a means of control. I was just in Basel the other day and I sat down to take in the sights, and this girl sat down next to me and she was telling me that she's a doctor and she's in this situationship with this guy and it's been over a year. And she kept saying the attachment's too strong, the attachment's too strong, because I was like, I get that. I've been there, but girl, you need to get out. Because I think what she was saying was the sex was too good, right? Because if somebody's not interested in committing to you in a relationship and they just want to have sex with you, that is a form of coercive control. I know that you talk a lot about the difference between your friends with benefits and like making sure that you have those ground rules laid down. That's a really good way to avoid getting into a situationship where you're being controlled and the sex is the thing that's keeping you going, keeping you connected. Because that was something that was true for us for a very long time. Like, he didn't show up to be dad until the day that she turned 5, literally the night before her 5th birthday. He called and asked. But he and I had been having sex all of those years. And so it complicated things because he was still around, but he wasn't around.
Thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. And I know that as we talk, you'll be sharing more with us. And sex can be such a tool of manipulation. The coercive control, when you were talking about your experience with the police, the questions that it's state dependent, but I think generally overall, the questions that are asked in these situations do not capture the coercive control. They often are about physical violence and often specific type of physical violence as well. And it can be limiting as far as really truly capturing abuse. And so I think the work that you do is so key, and other advocates, to really help change and update the laws and the systems. So huge.
It's not just the laws and the systems, it's the training. It's helping law enforcement to recognize the symptoms and the situations that people find themselves in. Because what usually happens is law enforcement comes, they interview everybody, they find out that there was no physical altercation, but you'll see something like he locked her out of the house, right? And she's trying to get in. It is her house. She's on the lease. She lives there. He locked her out of the house to punish her for something that he didn't like that she did, right? So then she calls the police come out, they talk to everybody, but they don't see that act of locking her out as a form of control, as a form of abuse. They say, okay, there was no abuse. So then there's never any reports filed. There's never any pattern to start to look at, because that's the thing. That's the other thing, is that everybody keeps looking for this like isolated incident, this one thing that happened, and they're not looking at at the pattern of behavior of, I look back to my parents were married for 36 years, and my dad was very abusive to my mom. The only time that he ever was arrested for that abuse was at the end of their marriage after 36 years. But when you look back, you can see all these moments where it was things like we were out on a family camping trip and he packed up the car and took off and left us in the middle of the woods with no clue of whether or not he was going to come back because they had gotten in some kind of fight. Nobody's calling the police for that kind of stuff. You don't see these patterns until you start to document it and look at it and go, oh. And it was the same thing in my situation. I was just seeing like, oh yeah, here's a person that I feel safe having sex with, even though he is the father of my child and he wants nothing to do with her. It's okay that I sneak over here to get a little because I'm kind of horny tonight, right? There was a piece of me that didn't recognize that was a way for me to not keep pressing and asking for the things that I needed or wanted because it seemed like I was getting enough. And then when I look back over the course of her entire life, I'm like, oh, that was abusive. Oh, that was abusive. And I'm recognizing that that pattern started way, way, way before any of the physical stuff ever took place.
All right, listen, I'm doing something for the people who like to come early and come often from now until November 30th. Anyone who joins my Patreon is automatically entered into a Black Friday giveaway. I'm giving away 3 little pleasure bundles. Each one comes with a touchy-feely intimacy game and a bottle of Lubify Luxe Lube. 3 winners. I announced them December 1st on Instagram. So if you've been flirting with joining, this is your sign to stop lurking and get in the room. Foreplay and aftercare are waiting. Links in the show notes. Go on, treat yourself. So, speaking to your experience, what were you longing for, like in your life when that relationship started? You mentioned that you were going through a breakup, and what did the relationship feel like in the early days for you? And then also through your work, maybe some similarities or some patterns that you've seen with other survivors in those early days of the relationships.
That's a great question because I think back to this, and I was coming out of a marriage. I'd been married for 4 years. We'd been together for 7. He'd been having an affair with a friend of ours who happened to also be a coworker of his. I was not in a good emotional place. I should not have been in any kind of relationship at all. And I will still stand 10 toes down that what the father of my child and I had was not a relationship. It was definitely a situationship. And even that feels a little strong for me. At the time I was living in Seattle, I had friends in Denver who wanted me to move there, and this friend was so well-meaning and she's like, just come hang out with us and see if there's anything there. And it was like, okay, whatever. We talked a little bit before. This is 2004, so we talked a little bit before by chatting on IM and stuff, but we hadn't actually met until the week that I came down to visit Denver, and I was there for a Halloween party, and it felt like there was no pressure. And also because there was no pressure, I finally get to be free and just let myself be whoever I want to be right now. And right now, I just want to get laid. And that was fine. I ended up moving to Denver a few months later. I already had this built-in community because I had that group of friends. But that was the only group of friends that I had, which was more friends than I had when I moved to Seattle. But it was like we were all spending time together all the time. It just created this opportunity for me to feel like I was building something. And it was just easy, right? Like I didn't have to date. I could just do whatever. And then things started to get really weird because my divorce was getting a little bit messy. And so it was like, I recognized I'm like, I'm not in the emotional space. I don't have the capacity for any of this right now. I'm good. And we walked away. We both walked away. Cool. No hard feelings. There's no expectations here. And so then when I turned up pregnant a few months later, then it became this whole thing. It was so weird because it was like, I didn't like you that much. You didn't like me that much. So where is this accusation that I did this on purpose to catch you? That's one of the famous abuser lines, right? You did this on purpose to trap me in this relationship. Trust me, dude, you are the last person that I want to be attached to for the rest of my life. Because was so late in my pregnancy, it was like, you hid this from me and you kept this from me. I'm like, no, I promise you, I can show you all of the doctor's records. Like, this is when I found out. Then he had gotten in a whole other relationship. But before all of that, he was just so nice. Like, he was the most charming guy. I had just come out of a relationship where I'd been getting treated like shit. And here comes this guy who opens my doors and pays for things and invites me to the movies and is, hey, you want to just hang out? And so it was like, yeah, sure. It just felt like there was this low pressure for it to need to be anything. And I was getting just enough of what I needed, which was just a little bit of care and attention. Even after things got weird when I was pregnant, I still was like, but he's still such a nice guy. He's that guy in the neighborhood that everybody invites over for barbecues. And he's that guy who, when somebody needs something, he's the first one to drop everything and be like, I'll be right there. He's that guy who is, yes, you can take my truck to move. Heck, I'll come over and help you move. He's so nice. And I think that every single person who comes out of a DV relationship can say that about that. Because the thing is if these guys are assholes from day one, they're not going to get very far. That's part of that love bombing cycle.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what also makes that essentially so challenging, and a lot of people who, like a lot of survivors, tend to be empaths, right? You lean into that, your empathy, to kind of justify, this is a good person, they're just XYZ. And also, if maybe you're a people pleaser too, I think that can be a common trait with survivors as well, right? And so it's
a trauma response. It's not a trait.
Yes. Thank you for calling that out. Yes. Trauma response. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like I think about the fawn. We don't talk nearly enough about that. And that's the people pleaser, right? He told me, I find myself pregnant. I'm surprised. Well, shit, I guess I'm doing this, right? He's like, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm in this other relationship. I'm happy now. And he just pushed it all away. And I just so generously didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to push the envelope. I didn't want to mess with anything. So I just kind of let him do whatever. I didn't even tell him that I had the baby until she was like a month old. And then I didn't even tell him that she was a girl until she was like 4 months old. And he asked for a DNA test. And it was just like, you know, he said he wanted this, and then I was like, okay, I'll do that. And then it was like, well, I'll give you a little bit of money because you don't have to take me to court for child support. I'll give you some money. And then he gave me money, and then it was like, well, I don't have this job anymore because I don't like working at this job anymore, so I can't pay you the child support that we agreed to. So you're just going to have to be good with taking less money. And it was always like last minute notifications. And it was just like, you know, he couldn't mail it to me. I had to go pick it up at his house. There was all these little things that it was just so, I found myself accommodating him so much. And it wasn't until like within the last couple of years I realized, holy shit, that all was abuse too, because he kept discouraging me from going to the courts, and he kept discouraging me from doing all kinds of things, while at the same time wanting to have it both ways of, I'm this good guy because I'm giving you $500 a month, that then became 400, that then became 300, that then became 200. And so it was just like, I kept going back to this nice guy that I had met, and like, I don't want to make life harder for him. Meanwhile, I'm hanging on by a thread, paying more than what I was paying in rent for daycare. The money he was giving me didn't even cover half that. I never once thought about the way I was making myself smaller to accommodate him, because I still had this idea in my head. He's such a nice guy. I just don't want to ruin his life. And I feel like that's the party line that we have been socialized to believe, right? You see it in sexual abuse cases, you see it in domestic abuse cases. We can't, for the life of us, ruin his life or his potential. But all of us women need to be the sacrifice for that, make the sacrifice for that.
Yeah, breathing through all of this, because it's so familiar. The confusion too and chaos that is created by abusers, people in coercive control, can be just that, like confusing, right? And you don't know what way's up or down. And then there's also cycles, right? Mm-hmm. So it's cyclical. So all of a sudden, in all of this confusion, in this manipulation,
a very specific memory of a positive day, and this was before he decided to be a dad. So she was 3 years old. We were in town because at the time I was living back home because, again, couldn't afford rent or couldn't get a decent job as a single parent. And so we had just come back to Denver to visit. And I think I had a few photography jobs that week. And so I had stopped by to pick up the child support check, and he made some comment about, hey, let's go over to this like fun center that's down the street. I think she'd have a really good time and we can talk. And here I'm thinking, that sounds great, right? I'm going to go sit with the father of my child. Sounds like maybe he's coming around to this idea that he's a dad. She's 3 years old. I'm thinking it's going to be this like decent family time. Not necessarily that I wanted to be in a relationship with him, but oh, this will be some nice time for us together. She can get to know her dad. The whole time we were there, he sat on his phone texting some other girl while she was running around. And I'm like, why did you ask us to come here if you're not even going to engage? And I was so disoriented by that. There was a couple times after he did become a dad, like we would go camping together. It was just so confusing because it was like, here we were like acting like this totally normal family, even though he and I weren't in a relationship. He wasn't like fully being, it was so bizarre. That was so disorienting because I'm like, I don't know where I stand with this guy. Because as soon as I had resigned to the idea that he was never going to be there, all of a sudden here he is, hey, I want to be a dad. And then he comes in as perfect Disneyland dad. And he's, throwing money at this, and he's buying her a new bike, and he's getting this, and he's taking her for this. And it was so much. And I just didn't know what to do with all of that. I still think back to those days and I just laugh because I'm like, it's disorienting is the best way to think of it.
That word is so key, disorienting. And I would just like, for listeners who are listening in, if this is resonating with you, like really lean into that, the disorientation, because I think that that's a red flag that we often dismiss.
I also think too about the disorienting nature of the inconsistencies, right? So like you'll have 3 good things happen. So this thing happened, it made you feel really good. And then, so you're like, okay, we're in a good spot. And then you go out and you ask for something that you need or want. And all of a sudden it's like, why would you ask me for that? And you're just like, where did this come from? That's another part of the disorientation is that Mr. Hyde comes out when you least expect it. And it almost always is right after this like period of super nice guy. Dr. Jekyll is just like, hey, girl, hey. And I keep using gender specific language. And I want to acknowledge that this does happen in homosexual relationships as well as in heterosexual relationships. The statistics show that people who identify as male tend to be the perpetrators overwhelmingly, 75% of the time. I need to double check that stat, but it's a lot more. So that's why I'm choosing this language that I'm choosing. But I do want to flag and recognize that people who identify as female can also be perpetrators, especially in homosexual relationships.
Just going back to the disorientation too, like it also works the other way where you could be like, they're acting really, really shitty and all of the stuff, and you're feeling terrible. And then they try to initiate sex and you're still like in this haze of trying to deal with the emotions, and they're all of a sudden trying to do something positive. It's a way that sex is being used as a manipulation tool.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, the number of times that happened to me in my marriage, I can't even, I lose track because sex is definitely a manipulation tool. That's part of the coercive control too, right? If you ever feel pressured into having sex to avoid or to appease, that is not consensual sex. That is rape.
Right.
Not legally in the US. It is now in France. Thank you to Giselle Pellico for standing up against all of the men who raped her. Hopefully in the US we'll get there. But
yeah, just since we're on the topic of sex, how did sex feel in like either your marriage, with your daughter's dad, in the situationship? Did it feel like connection, obligation, survival, something else? You kind of went into this, but I'd love to hear a little bit more.
I think it depended on the day. I know exactly the day that I got pregnant with her because I had a huge fight with one of my best friends and I was really upset and I didn't know anybody in Denver. I showed up at his door and I was like, I'm really upset. I just need to rage for a minute. And he had a whole workout room in his basement with a punching bag. And I was like, I just need to rage. Can I go downstairs and just punch it out? And he's like, yeah, sure. And we ended up having sex that night. And that felt more like consolation sex, right? Like she's mad and this might make her feel good, right? But not all the sex was like that. Some of it was definitely like, hey, I just need to get some. And we had a whole thing. And gosh, I hope my daughter is not listening to this. We had a whole thing where we really loved having sex in public places. There was a little bit of the thrill and like the dare of what is that, exhibitionism? Some of it was that too, of like me who had grown up in this purity culture, who had, like I said, I was kind of sowing my own oats. It all felt so taboo. And so just like, oh yeah, I'm going to be this bad girl because I never got to do that. I got married so young. It just felt really good to just kind of be a little naughty for a change. And so that was part of it too, I think, was that some of our sex was that of just like exploring my own sexuality with somebody who felt safe to me. Because we weren't in a relationship and we didn't live together, I didn't end up in those dynamics where like sex was weaponized against me for the purposes of like punishing me, or makeup sex wasn't a thing, but sex was definitely weaponized for sure. It was really interesting that this was another thing that was like anytime that I would get interested or involved with somebody else, all of a sudden he would be like, hey girl. And so I found that was really interesting too, because it was almost like trying to keep me for himself and keep me on the line while I knew that he was so promiscuous. Like his neighbors used to joke about the number of girls that used to sneak out of his garage in the mornings, because that's how many girls he always had over. So like I just think about that and kind of laugh because it was, again, it was a way to keep me close, keep me in control. I do remember having this conversation with my friend at one point when my daughter was probably like 2 or 3. I don't know if he's ready to be a dad, if he wants to be in a relationship, if he wants to date me for a little while, going back into that confusion state. I don't want a relationship with this guy, but it seems like he wants one with me. Should I open myself up to that? I find that interesting.
So there's so much shame in the question, like, why didn't you just leave? You know, survivors hear this often. So what do you wish as an advocate, as a survivor yourself, that people would understand about the complexity of staying?
First of all, I wish that the question was, why is he abusing you? Because when you say, why didn't you leave? Now you're blaming me for staying in a situation that I never asked for. These are the things that you end up seeing over time. And I would say I definitely saw it in my parents' marriage. I saw some of it in my own situation with the father of my child. My mom was a stay-at-home mom until I was 12, and then she went to work. My dad started his own business when I was 12. There was this very interesting pattern of my mom would go to these jobs for like 1 or 2 years, and then all of a sudden my dad's business would get so big that he needed my mom to come work for him. But she wasn't working for him because she wasn't being paid by him. She was working for free as part of the family business, right? So she was saying no to economic stability. I only realized this probably in the last 7 or 8 months. Every single time that my mom went to work for my dad, that's when his abuse increased because she couldn't leave. She didn't have an economic way to support herself and her 3 kids. We didn't have any family close by. Both of my parents have all their families on the East Coast. They moved out to Arizona before I was born, and they raised their family there with no family nearby. So like she didn't have family that she could take us and go to easily. He controlled the bank accounts. You all need to have your own bank account. I will say this. I don't care what kind of a relationship you get in, you should still have your own bank account that is funded and has oh shit money and the ability to be able to get away. I know in this economy that Amy and I were talking about before we started recording, it's hard to save money right now. And nobody ever wants to get into a relationship thinking that it's not going to work out. But if you don't have your own means of income and you don't have your own means of spending money without somebody overseeing it, that's one of the ways that you get trapped in these relationships. If your partner is sabotaging your opportunities to earn money, like my dad was doing to my mom, the father of my child did this right after I had filed for child support and custody paperwork. He had gone in, this is so messy. The guy who introduced us in the first place, I ended up dating him later on down the line. So he had gone into my boyfriend's business partner and started screaming and yelling about how this guy had stolen his woman and da 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 da. It was so embarrassing. But like he was looking to and successfully did sabotage my boyfriend's business to get back at me. He didn't actually affect directly at that point my ability to earn income, but he affected this other person's ability to have income. That whole year, I did ultimately end up losing my job because I had to be in court all the time. When you think about being able to get out, and like I testified on a bill this year in Colorado that helps victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking have housing protection so they can't get evicted if they're not able to pay rent because of their abuse. And they're also not legally liable for any damages that are caused. And they're able to break their lease and move and have those records suppressed, like if they have to move for any of those reasons. I wish that existed when I was going through all of this, which is why I testified, because that's the other thing is it's so much harder to find yourself a place to live. It's harder to break leases. It's harder to save up for deposits. There's so many other ways that you end up trapped in these situations. So that's why it's an average of 7 times for somebody to leave. So if you're living with somebody and you're trying to get out, it's a long game. It's a long game because they'll do everything they can to force your hand to come back and or punish you by keeping you stuck someplace, right? So like my daughter and I lived in this really shitty apartment for 11 years. The whole reason that we had to move in there in the first place was when we needed a place to live, and I asked him to help us. He refused to co-sign on a lease for us because he wanted to buy a boat. And then we moved into this place. I wasn't getting child support. I was paying all this extra money out, all these things. So I couldn't afford to move. My credit gets tanked. Now I can't qualify for anything without paying crazy amounts of money. So there's so many factors that go into all of this. It's maddening. That's like economic abuse is a piece of coercive control. And that's how people end up trapped. Because if you can't get a job, if your phone bill's being paid by somebody else, like they'll cut your phone off. They'll go through your phone because they feel like they have a right to access that information. They'll go through your email. They will find ways to make you compliant to what they want by pressing on all the different levers of what will make you respond and behave and all of these other things. So that's how
it's so nuanced. And I love that you said the question should be different. And again, goes back to the societal changes that need to take place, right? When you look back, what was happening in your body that your mind may have not had that language for, but that you have the language for now?
I mean, they always talk about your intuition and your gut feelings. My guts were pissed all the time. I literally had like indigestion all the time, heartburn, all these things. I could feel it in my body. One thing that happened was at the end of 2019, all I got was, and at this point we had been in really awful court battles for 2 years, and all I got was an email notification because his mom was really sick and he was wanting my daughter to go to California to see his mom for her last birthday. And we had been negotiating. All of our negotiations at that point had been very tenuous and usually ended up in me deciding to say no because whatever it was wasn't worth all of the rest of his behavior. And so I had put a firm boundary that I said, I know she loves her yaya and this is going to be important to her. And I will say yes on one condition, and that's that you are not there. Because at the time he still had a no contact order. All I got was the notification from Talking Parents that I had a new message. And the next thing I know, I'm standing on a sidewalk. I can't breathe. I was on the bus on my way to work. My whole body got flushed. It was November. So like I had on like a sweater and a jacket, and I was like, I gotta get off this bus. I couldn't breathe. I was flushed. And I'm like standing there on the sidewalk, just like hyperventilating. And my friend got off the bus with me and was like, are you okay? And I'm like, no. And I don't know what's wrong. And when I was explaining that to my therapist the following week, she's like, yeah, that was a panic attack. To this day, anytime I see his name, any one of his family members' names, I haven't actually spoken to the man in 4 years, but like anytime I hear or see anything, my body has that same reaction. My heart rate goes up. I get clammy hands. I get sweaty. I can't breathe. They say the body keeps the score. Like my body still remembers this person isn't safe. I've been doing a lot of work to help with that.
The triggers are still there. And it's a matter of like figuring out how to manage that, right?
Laura Richards says all the time, like she hosts the Crime Analyst podcast and she does like coercive control trainings. She talks about like the butterflies in our stomach. And she's like, I will argue that that's not a good thing, that is your nervous system warning you that this person isn't safe, because you should not be feeling those kinds of trauma responses around a safe person. I think
Yeah.
that like all of the times I was just like, yeah, I never quite felt safe around him. Not so much that I was worried for my own safety at the time. I was always more worried about like, is he going to start shit with that guy? He had a temper for sure. And he would brag about it. He would be like, oh yeah, we got in this fight at the bar and I took this guy down and da-da. That's not normal behavior. Anytime I would be out, there was always just a little bit of tightness in my body where I'd be on edge because I was just never quite sure what would happen.
Previously, we were talking about how when you were telling the story about, trying to get to the funeral and that like rather than asking, right, the abuser, like often it's easier to just jump through all of these hoops, take on all of this extra burden, then approach them for something, right? Which I think is really, really common, right? And so that's another thing to look for. Is there something there where it's easier not to go to that person? That's a safety and survival mechanism that you may not even know that you're enacting for yourself.
I think you just made such a great point because I think back to all of the times that I was afraid to ask for what I needed because I wasn't sure how he was going to respond. We're talking about over years. Like there was a time I had no money. It was like the middle of the month. My gas tank was empty. I called in sick to work because I didn't have the gas to get there and I didn't have the money to put in my tank. And I remember calling him and being like, hey, can you come over for a little bit? I need to talk to you. Kind of laying out how hard life was. My daughter was like, she had just turned 1. I was terrified to have that conversation, but I was like, if I don't make this call, I'm going to get fired from my job and then I'm going to get evicted from this place that I just moved into. I just remember feeling like I couldn't ask him, even though I shouldn't have ever been afraid. And there were other times when I went, like when I asked for help with moving into the apartment and he said no. Like there were a lot of times I asked for what I needed and he said no. And then that also gave me the proof that I needed, like he's not going to help me. So then I stopped asking. That's another form of control because they say yes or
Absolutely.
no on their own schedule. It's not consistent enough to where you can go reasonably. They probably will say yes, or if they say no, it's because they absolutely couldn't help me right now. That's a normal relationship. You can go to somebody, and if they can, they will help.
Oh my God, this is like such a wealth. I mean, so much knowledge and experience that you're sharing. So I'm curious, as a survivor, what helped you to step into, speaking up, advocating, taking on that role?
I have to say that the honest answer to that is surviving the court system. In 2017, we had 3 different court cases that were active during that year. The first one was the civil court case that I had filed at the end of 2016 to establish parentage with the court and ask for like legal protections. The first time I filed for anything with the court, because again, he had always discouraged me from doing that because it gave him more control. I didn't realize that it was giving him leverage because I was, again, being compliant and just like, I don't want to rock the boat. Everything's fine. So I filed this at the end of 2016. The end of January 2017 is when he attacked her. I was like trying to stop that case from getting finalized because a week after I get the notice from the court that's like, hey, we want to schedule your final hearing on this case that you filed last fall. And I was like, no, we don't. And so I had to like stop that. And then we had this criminal case going, which that took forever. Like our first hearing was in May. And then we had a protection order that went into place that should have been in place in February. And that's a whole other soapbox I could get on, and I won't, about how the court system just does not seem to police itself, or like you have to hold the system accountable to make sure that you're getting what are your rights under the law, which is so fucked up. I don't even know where to start. And then we had a violation of a protection order inside of all of that. So like we're dealing with 3 different cases in 2 different jurisdictions. 2 of them are criminal. 1 of them is civil. The courts don't talk to each other. I found out at the sentencing hearing for the criminal case that I wasn't even allowed to bring in the evidence from the civil case to help justify a longer sentence, which is a whole other thing. I don't even know to this day if that's true. I need to find that out. But I remember giving my statement in front of the court. I was giving my victim impact statement. And essentially the judge was like, there, little girl. Thank you for your fierce advocacy. You can sit down now. Like he actually said that, like, you can sit down now. And it was like, no, this is my kid. this is her safety that we're talking about here. And he just kind of dismissed me like it was weird that I was there. And through that whole criminal process, I felt completely erased. I felt like I had no voice. I would go in and I would be like, this is what I want. And then the DA would be like, well, I will state that for the record, but we're going to do this. And I just felt completely hopeless in all of that. I was so frustrated. I started to do some research and it was like, well, in the criminal side, I wasn't a party to the case. I was a witness. And there's a difference. And so we talk about a lot in advocacy circles how a civil case can sometimes be your best bet for accountability because you're actually a party to the case, right? You're not a witness. And so that was why, like in the criminal side, it's the state is suing him for breaking the law. So they sued him for breaking the law against child abuse. And he had to plead for that and all of those things. But like, despite the fact that my daughter was the center of that, she was the main victim and I was a secondary victim there. We weren't actually party to the case. And that was so frustrating to me. It was like, no, like we have to be able to go in and advocate for these kids because they can't do it themselves. And we need to remember at the end of the day that there is a child here who has been harmed. And they need to stop being the child and the mother and the father. It's like I wanted people to say my daughter's name in that courtroom and they wouldn't. So that was really the beginning of it for me, was like, what is going on here? I just started talking about my experience and that caused some other people in my life to come forward and be like, oh my gosh, we had a similar experience. And the more I started talking, the more I realized there's a problem here. So one of the other volunteer pieces that I do is I am the board chair currently for Colorado Common Cause, which is a voting rights advocacy nonprofit. It's national, nonpartisan. And so by working with this organization, I got my feet wet in policy work and I got to start meeting our legislators and got to start meeting people that are working on doing the work, right? That are helping to make the change. And so that's how I ended up getting into the advocacy work on the DV side, was just like, wait a second. Okay, so if we don't have this and I want this, I can talk to these people and we can change the laws and then we can have that. So that's really where it got started. And the last couple of years, I've been really excited to participate on the legislative level in getting some laws passed to help provide protections for DV survivors and kids. At the end of the day, if the system's not working for us, we got to change the system.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love for you to talk about like what are some patterns that you see across survivors that don't get talked about enough?
I mean, the number one thing, we kind of touched on it before, is I feel like all of us as survivors have some level of empathy, for sure. Another thing that's pretty common, although it's not in always, those of us who are survivors in domestic abuse situations, we're also survivors of child abuse. Because like, I was always comparing the situation that I was in to my mom and dad. My mom and dad's situation was very violent all the time. It was very traumatic for me as a kid. And so for me, I'm going, well, he's not doing that, so it's not that bad. I don't like it. He's just kind of an asshole, right? Like, I wasn't really thinking about it as him being a coercive controller and the way that that was diminishing me. The other thing that I see a lot is this is such a common misconception of like, well, how could you be so weak? They think that these predators prey on weak targets, and the opposite is actually true. It's the more independent, the more fierce, like the ones who can stand on their own tend to be the ones who become victims. And I think it's twofold. I think on the perpetrator side, it's because it's a challenge. On the victim side, it's because we think somehow we're smarter than and impervious to this kind of abuse. And I would say that every single person I know who's a fellow survivor is an intelligent, educated woman who can stand on her own 2 feet and maybe even a third, no problem at all until they've gone through this situation. I think that that's another common thing that I see. And so then that also goes into that disorientation because you're like, oh, well, she seems too smart to fall for that kind of stuff. And it's like, no. Nobody fell for anything. It's a breaking down of your psyche. Yes. It's the belief that you're not good enough, that you have to settle. There's a lot.
Damn, that was good. Ooh, I'm like taking in all of what you just shared with us. I mean, survivors are badass, you know?
I'm like,
right? I know, like move that energy. The fact that all that they have to endure in silence and isolation a lot of times, just How badass are they? So, bringing it back to kind of dating, I'm curious when people do exit these relationships and try to start dating again, like, how was that for you? And also, like, how can we start trusting ourselves once we've had a relationship that was abusive and being able to move into more healthy relationships?
I don't even like the term healthy relationships because we don't have abusive relationships. Like, we're in relationships with abusive people. It's not the relationship that's abusive, it's the person. I have to be honest, like, me personally, I have struggled with it. I am, as you know, a fiercely independent, proudly single woman. I have had 2 long-term relationships in the last 10 years, and I think maybe 3 or 4 overall in my lifetime. I have been one of those people that has really tried to not get into relationships because I'm still healing from all of this and I'm terrified of ending up in a similar or worse situation, even though logically I know that's not true. The last relationship I was in, I was very open with that from day one. All that to say, it's not like if you feel comfortable putting yourself out into the world and wanting to date again, just take it slow. Like, one of the key things that happens in abusive relationships is that whirlwind romance, right? Like, everything moves so fast. Everybody's saying I love you within a couple of weeks and you're my whole world and I would die for you. No, these are all red flags. I want to make you my queen. That's another one of my red flags. Nope, sorry. But just like, be willing to take it slow. And because I think so many people get lost in that love bombing phase because it feels so good, especially if after you've been hurt, especially after you might have been alone for a while. It's really easy to be like, oh yeah, I remember what this was like. Yeah, this was nice, you know? And so I think that's just take it slow. Trust yourself too. The second things feel off, get out.
Yeah, no more justifications. So, for people who may be listening in who are like, oh, they feel like they are in a confusing or unsafe relationship, what's a tiny step that they can do?
I'll give 2 options because I feel like this could be a choose your own adventure. The first one would be check in with somebody at thehotline.org. They have anonymous services. You can chat with somebody, you can text them, you can email them, you can call them, and just kind of talk through the situation. Know what your options are. You know, you don't have to start safety planning. You don't have to start making an exit, planning for an exit or any of that stuff right away. But sometimes you just need to be validated. And then the second option, if you feel like that's too big of a step, just confide in somebody that you trust with what's going on, because sometimes you just need to get it off your chest, but B, also have it reflected back that you're not crazy. Because when you're in these situations and you feel like you don't know which way is up or what's real, you start to question everything. Find somebody that can reflect back to you the reality and help you be more grounded.
I love that. So true. And for people who are listening in who may be on the friend or family side of someone who is in a situation or relationship like this, what are things that are helpful and that they can do that would be supportive, and things that like are not helpful and that they should avoid doing?
The easier one is always the not helpful, which is let's not be judgmental and victim blame. If somebody is trusting you enough to talk to you, don't ruin that. The minute that they feel that they're being judged, you will no longer be somebody that they will trust. Listen with open ears, curiosity, non-judgmental. Please try to avoid giving advice, because that's another thing that I think a lot of people do. Well, if I was in that situation, I would da 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 da. Because here's the truth. Even if you have been in a similar situation to somebody, things are not the same. And so just giving unsolicited advice is not recommended. The things that they can do is just let that person know that you're there for them. And then the other thing I would say is just start showing them different ways that you are able to be available. So if it's, hey, just want to let you know I have an extra room if you ever need it. There's no pressure, but it's letting them know that they have a safe place to go if they ever need it. And then make sure that that's actually an offer. Don't put out offers that you're not going to fulfill, but avoiding well, let me know if you need anything. Be more specific, right? Hey, I am going to the store and I'm picking some stuff up. Would it be helpful if I got these few things and dropped them by? So that kind of that proactive behavior.
This has been amazing. I have some few last questions. So, if you could sit with a version of yourself that was still in that relationship, what will you whisper to her that she might be able to actually like hear and receive?
The first thing that comes to mind, which I know is not the right answer, is run. She wouldn't have heard that. She wouldn't have listened to that. But no, I think the thing that I would want her to know is that, like, her being in this situation doesn't make her a bad person. I say this all the time, and it's become my mantra more recently. I did the best I could with the information that I had at the time. So I can't judge myself for decisions I made then with information I have now, because I get so down on myself for the choices and decisions that I made. And it's like, well, but if I knew what I knew now, then I would have made that decision. But I didn't know that then. I made the decisions with the information I had at the time, and it was the best that I could do.
I love that. I love that. And finally, who are you now that she couldn't have imagined back then?
I'm in France right now. I am on day 30 of a 110-day world tour. There is no version of me that ever could have imagined that I would be doing this right now or could do this. None. I love to travel, and it has always been something that I've wanted to do and enjoy with my daughter. And we have traveled together a little bit. And she travels. She loves to travel too. Like, she's in nursing school. She wants to be a traveling nurse.
Yeah, that's amazing. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. This has been amazing, Eunice. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you want to share with our listeners?
I think the biggest thing is, I will leave this as my parting comment. No matter what you've been through and where you are in that journey, whether you're in the beginning, middle, or end, although I don't argue there's not really an end, we're always healing, but you are worthy of being here. You are a whole and amazing person. There is nobody that can take that away from you.
Beautiful, beautiful ending words. I love that. Thank you, Eunice, so much for your time and for sharing so much of your story and yourself with us. Where can listeners find you?
They can find me on my website at euniceBrownlee.com or on Instagram at Eunice Brownlee.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eunice. And thank you so much for our listeners for listening in. We love you so much. We will be putting some resources in the show notes. As always, thank you for coming. Please come again, and come again. That's all for today, lover. Remember to masturbate, lubricate, and get ate. If you liked this episode, share with a friend, like, subscribe, and as always, thank you for coming. Please come again, and come again.